High above desert plateaus and buried beneath centuries of sand lie clues that science still can't fully decode. At first glance, Egypt's ancient monuments may look like ruins, weathered stone, broken statues, and faded inscriptions. We've seen them in textbooks, documentaries, and museum exhibits. But what if the story we think we know barely scratches the surface? What if some of Egypt's most iconic structures, celebrated for their historical significance, still conceal secrets untouched by even our most advanced technologies? This isn't about myths or pseudoscience. It's about real places, studied by experts, yet still wrapped in unanswered questions. Ground-penetrating radar returns strange anomalies. DNA testing yields results that raise more doubts than clarity. And time and again, archaeologists and engineers walk away with more questions than they arrived with. Because despite all our tools, all our data, and all our expertise, ancient Egypt continues to resist full explanation. And that's not just intriguing, it's unsettling. So if you're ready to explore the mysteries that even science can't solve, stay with us. What we're about to uncover might just change how you see the ancient world forever. If we fail to uncover these ancient truths, we risk losing more than just historical facts. We lose a deeper understanding of ourselves. Ancient Egypt wasn't just a civilization of temples and tombs. It was a society that engineered marvels we still can't replicate, followed rituals we can't fully interpret, and recorded lives we still struggle to decode. Every unanswered question isn't just a missing detail. It's a piece of the puzzle that could redefine our view of human capability, belief, and legacy. Because if the tomb of a queen remains hidden, or a monument beneath the sand holds knowledge we haven't yet unlocked, then we're not just leaving history buried, we're allowing the most advanced minds of the past to stay a step ahead of us. And in a world driven by progress, that's a challenge we can't afford to ignore. Few figures from the ancient world have captured the modern imagination like Queen Nefertiti. Her name means the beautiful one has come, but her legacy is defined by far more than beauty. She was one of ancient Egypt's most powerful queens, a woman whose influence extended deep into the religious, political, and cultural fabric of one of history's most complex civilizations. To understand why the mystery of her tomb continues to fascinate researchers and the public alike, we must first explore the extraordinary life she led and the revolutionary period in which she lived. Nefertiti lived during the 14th century BCE, during the 18th dynasty of Egypt's New Kingdom, a time often regarded as the golden age of ancient Egyptian civilization. She was the chief wife of Pharaoh Akhenaten, a ruler best known for abandoning Egypt's traditional polytheistic religion in favor of worshipping a single deity, Aten, the sun disk. This religious revolution, often referred to as the Amarna period, was one of the most dramatic cultural upheavals in Egyptian history, and Nefertiti stood at the center of it. Not only did she serve as queen, but historical evidence suggests she was also Akhenaten's most trusted partner, a co-ruler in all but name. What set Nefertiti apart from other royal consorts was the degree of visibility and authority she commanded. In temple carvings and reliefs, she's shown performing the kinds of rituals typically reserved for pharaohs, making offerings to the gods, smiting enemies, riding chariots, and even wearing the distinctive blue crown associated with kingship. This was highly unusual for a queen and suggested a woman with both public stature and sovereign power. Some scholars even argue that after Akhenaten's death, Nefertiti may have ruled in her own right, under a different name, possibly as the mysterious pharaoh Neferuaten, though this theory remains debated. What is less debated is the cultural prominence of her image. The famous painted limestone bust of Nefertiti, discovered in 1912 by German archaeologist Ludwig Borchardt, is now one of the most iconic representations of ancient Egypt. With its elongated neck, regal expression, and detailed craftsmanship, The bust has become a global symbol of feminine beauty and ancient elegance. But beneath the surface of that carefully sculpted image lies a complex historical figure, one whose political presence and spiritual symbolism represented a bold reimagining of Egyptian society. Nefertiti and Akhenaten moved the Egyptian capital from Thebes to a new city entirely of their own design, Akhetaten, known today as Amarna. This city was built quickly, intended as a pure space to worship Aten, and in doing so, it symbolized a total departure from the traditional religious order. Temples, palaces, homes, everything about Amarna was structured around solar worship. And the divinity of the royal family, Nefertiti, as the queen, was not merely the consort of a revolutionary ruler. She was the female embodiment of this religious transformation. Together, she and Akhenaten presented themselves as intermediaries between Aten and the people, a divine royal couple illuminated by the sun god himself. Yet for all the boldness of their reign, the Amarna period was short-lived. After Akhenaten's death, the religious experiment was quickly dismantled. Egypt's old gods were restored. The capital was moved back to Thebes, and many references to Akhenaten and Nefertiti were defaced or erased from official records. This effort to purge their memory from history was deliberate and far-reaching, a political attempt to undo what had been done and return Egypt to a sense of religious and social continuity. This sudden historical erasure is part of what makes Nefertiti's legacy so compelling today. For someone who had stood so visibly at the center of Egyptian power, the abrupt disappearance of her name, titles, and burial place presents a deep historical enigma. How does a queen of such significance simply vanish from the record? And why? Has no trace of her tomb ever been definitively identified? The mystery is deepened by her relationship to other key figures in Egyptian history. She was likely the stepmother, or possibly the mother, of the famous boy king, Tutankhamun. As Egypt began to recover from the religious schism of the Amarna period, Tutankhamun came to symbolize a return to traditional values. His reign, though brief, is one of the most well-documented thanks to the discovery of his nearly intact tomb in 1922 by British archaeologist Howard Carter. But Nefertiti's story remained fragmented. Despite decades of searching, no scholar has been able to produce conclusive evidence of where her body was buried, or even if it was buried at all. For Egyptologists, Nefertiti's vanished tomb isn't just a missing piece of the archaeological record. It's a missing link in the political and religious history of Egypt's most turbulent period. Her burial site, if ever found, could contain inscriptions, artifacts, and architecture that clarify the murky transitional years between the reign of Akhenaten and the resurgence of traditional pharaonic rule. It could also confirm or upend our theories about her identity, her role in succession, and whether she may have ruled as pharaoh in her own right. In many ways, the mystery of Nefertiti's tomb is inseparable from her legacy. She was erased, yet remains unforgettable. Denied a known grave, yet immortalized in art. Her story embodies the tension between visibility and absence, between political prominence and historical silence. It's no surprise, then, that her missing tomb continues to draw the attention of archaeologists, historians, and the public alike. And while modern technology has brought us closer than ever to solving the riddle, her secrets still lie just beyond our reach. In 2015, the quiet academic world of Egyptology was shaken by a bold proposal from British archaeologist Dr. Nicholas Reeves. Known for his extensive work on the Valley of the Kings, Reeves released a detailed study suggesting that Queen Nefertiti's long-lost tomb might be hiding in plain sight, hidden behind the walls of the most famous tomb ever discovered, that of Tutankhamun. Reeves' theory wasn't built on speculation, but on detailed analysis of high-resolution digital scans of the walls inside Tutankhamun's burial chamber. These scans, commissioned by the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities for preservation purposes, revealed what Reeves believed were subtle architectural anomalies, faint linear traces in the plasterwork, which he interpreted as the outlines of sealed doorways. Two such anomalies were identified, one on the northern wall and another on the western wall. His central thesis was simple but groundbreaking. According to Reeves, the tomb of Tutankhamun may have originally been constructed for Nefertiti. When the young king died unexpectedly at around 18 or 19 years old, his burial required immediate attention. Rather than build an entirely new tomb in a hurry, Egyptian officials may have adapted an existing one. Reeves proposed that Nefertiti's tomb, either unfinished or unused, had already been prepared and that Tutankhamun was laid to rest in the outer chambers, his own burial effectively grafted onto hers. If true, it meant that just meters beyond the painted walls of the boy king's chamber, the sealed and untouched burial of Queen Nefertiti could still exist, undiscovered for more than 3,000 years. The idea sent ripples through the archaeological community. Reeves' theory offered an elegant solution to two major puzzles: the small size and unusual layout of Tutankhamun's tomb, and the ongoing absence of any confirmed burial site for Nefertiti. Compared to the grand, multi-chambered tombs of other New Kingdom pharaohs, Tutankhamun's resting place is strikingly modest. Scholars had long wondered why such an important king, whose tomb was filled with riches, had been buried in a space more fitting for a nobleman or a queen. Reeves' hypothesis suggested that the tomb's original design wasn't for him at all. Supporting his argument, Reeves pointed to the decorative schemes within the burial chamber. On the northern wall, he noted, the paintings were stylistically distinct and may have been deliberately altered. One of the figures traditionally identified as Tutankhamun might in fact be Nefertiti, depicted in a posthumous ritual. According to this interpretation, the artwork had been repurposed, adapted hastily to fit the boy king's unexpected burial. Another detail bolstered the theory: the orientation of the tomb. Tutankhamun's burial chamber is aligned in a manner consistent with a queen's tomb, not a king's. In ancient Egyptian tradition, kings were buried facing a specific cardinal orientation associated with male divinity and pharaonic power. Tutankhamun's chamber deviates from that expectation, raising the possibility that it had been repurposed from a queen's design. Taken together, the small size, the altered murals, the unusual orientation, the evidence painted a picture that aligned with Reeves' radical proposal. Reeves' findings captured media attention worldwide. Headlines speculated that Nefertiti's tomb was on the verge of being discovered, and the Egyptian government responded with cautious interest. The Ministry of Antiquities authorized a series of non-invasive surveys to test Reeves' claims. Initial ground-penetrating radar (GPR) scans appeared promising. Conducted by Japanese specialist Hirokatsu Watanabe, the scans detected what seemed to be empty spaces beyond the walls, potentially hidden chambers, just as Reeves had suggested. For a moment, it seemed that archaeology was on the brink of one of its greatest discoveries since the original unsealing of Tutankhamun's tomb by Howard Carter in 1922. But excitement quickly turned to controversy. Subsequent radar scans conducted by separate teams, first by National Geographic, then by Italian researchers from the Polytechnic University of Turin, produced contradictory results. Some reported no clear evidence of voids. Others found inconsistencies in the original GPR data. By 2018, Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities officially concluded that there were no hidden chambers beyond the tomb's known boundaries. Despite the public declaration, debate within the academic community continued. Supporters of Reeves' theory argued that differing results could be due to variations in radar calibration, scanning techniques, or even the unique mineral composition of the tomb's surrounding bedrock. In other words, the tools might have failed to see what was truly there. Reeves himself remained confident, suggesting that more precise equipment or a new generation of scanning tools might yet confirm what early data had hinted at. To date, the walls remain sealed. Ethical and preservation concerns have largely prevented invasive excavation. The stakes are high. The paintings inside Tutankhamun's tomb are considered some of the finest examples of New Kingdom funerary art. Damaging them to explore a theory, no matter how compelling, would be a controversial act and potentially irreversible. Nevertheless, Reeves's theory has had a lasting impact. It has reshaped how scholars think about the layout of tombs in the Valley of the Kings and has kept Nefertiti at the center of Egyptological inquiry. It also reflects a deeper truth about archaeology itself, that even with the most advanced tools and decades of research, some of the past's most important secrets may still be hiding in plain sight. Reeves's proposal has become more than a theory. It's a symbol of how much we still don't know about one of history's most enduring civilizations. When Nicholas Reeves released his theory about the hidden chambers in Tutankhamun's tomb, all eyes turned to science for answers. Specifically, the tool of choice was ground-penetrating radar, GPR, a non-invasive geophysical method that sends electromagnetic pulses into the ground or through walls to detect hidden structures, anomalies, or empty spaces. In theory, it offered the perfect solution, a way to look beneath or behind the richly painted walls of Tutankhamun's tomb without damaging a single inch of the ancient artwork. But what followed was not the clear-cut confirmation many had hoped for. Instead, the technology revealed something far more frustrating: ambiguity. The first GPR scan was conducted in late 2015 by Hirokatsu Watanabe, a Japanese radar specialist who had worked previously with the Egyptian government. Using a radar antenna positioned close to the surface of the tomb's walls, Watanabe scanned the northern and western walls, the very places where Reeves had identified potential hidden doorways in the digital scans. His initial analysis seemed to confirm what Reeves suspected. Behind the painted surfaces, there were anomalies. Watanabe claimed to have found not only empty spaces, but also metallic and organic materials, terms that hinted at the possibility of funerary objects, or even human remains lying undisturbed. The announcement generated worldwide headlines. Egyptian officials publicly declared that hidden chambers likely existed. The excitement was palpable. Would this be the final step in solving the mystery of Nefertiti's tomb? Would the Valley of the Kings yield yet another discovery as dramatic as the one made by Howard Carter nearly a century earlier? But within months, doubts began to surface. For one, Watanabe's methodology came under scrutiny. Experts pointed out that he had not shared raw data or used a second radar operator to verify results, standard practice in geophysical research. Concerns were raised about calibration, interpretation, and peer review. The scientific process, which relies heavily on reproducibility, had not been fully honored. Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, under pressure to resolve the growing debate, invited independent teams to conduct follow-up scans using more refined techniques and stricter controls. In 2016, a second team, this time backed by National Geographic, entered the tomb to conduct another round of radar imaging. Unlike Watanabe, this group adhered to academic protocols. Their findings were far less conclusive. In fact, they suggested there were no significant voids behind the walls. While they acknowledged minor anomalies, nothing appeared to support the idea of large, sealed chambers. Things became even more complicated when, in 2018, a third team, led by experts from the Polytechnic University of Turin in Italy, performed additional GPR scans using equipment with higher resolution. Their results aligned with the second study, no conclusive evidence of any hidden rooms. They concluded that the anomalies noted by Reeves and Watanabe could be attributed to natural fissures in the bedrock or slight variations in the plaster. Nothing more. The discrepancy between the first scan and the later ones prompted heated debate. Why had Watanabe's radar found what others didn't? Critics speculated that his radar frequencies may have penetrated deeper than expected, or perhaps picked up signals from natural cavities misinterpreted as man-made. Others argued that subsequent teams might have used equipment optimized for different materials, potentially missing what the first scan had revealed. Radar, while powerful, is notoriously sensitive to environmental conditions, moisture levels, mineral content, density variations. All can distort or obscure results. In a tomb constructed over 3,000 years ago and nestled into limestone bedrock, these variables are amplified. Adding to the confusion was the fact that none of the data sets were made fully public. Some researchers called for transparency, asking for open access to all scan results so that independent experts could evaluate the evidence. But Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities, wary of misinterpretation or media sensationalism, has been cautious with the release of raw scientific data. As a result, a kind of scientific stalemate emerged. 3 radar scans, 3 conflicting interpretations, and 1 enduring mystery. Even now, the question lingers: did the radar fail, or is something truly hidden behind those walls? Some Egyptologists remain optimistic. They point out that radar technology is constantly improving. More precise instruments, better modeling software, and advanced data interpretation techniques could, in time, yield more reliable answers. Others suggest combining radar with other non-invasive technologies, such as muon tomography, an advanced scanning technique that uses cosmic rays to create 3D models of dense structures and has already been used in the Great Pyramid of Giza to detect hidden chambers. Yet while the science evolves, the politics of preservation complicate things. Tutankhamun's tomb is a fragile, culturally priceless site. The wall paintings, especially those on the north wall, are uniquely preserved and considered sacred by both historians and the Egyptian people. Even a minimal invasive attempt, such as drilling a small hole to insert a fiber optic camera, could cause irreversible damage. The Egyptian government has made it clear, unless new data is overwhelmingly convincing, physical intrusion will not be permitted. This places the mystery of Nefertiti's possible burial chamber in a kind of suspended animation, neither confirmed nor denied, just out of reach. The technology exists, but so do the risks. The debate remains one of the most complex intersections of archaeology, science, politics, and heritage ethics in modern history. Ultimately, the radar controversy reveals something deeper than just a technical disagreement. It highlights the limits of even our best tools when applied to ancient mysteries. For all our progress, some parts of the past remain elusive, not because the evidence isn't there, but because we haven't yet figured out how to ask the right questions or use the right tools in the right way. And until we do, Nefertiti's secret, if it exists at all, remains sealed behind a painted wall and centuries of silence. While ground-penetrating radar offered a promising way to search for hidden chambers, another line of investigation has tried to unlock Nefertiti's mystery from an entirely different angle: DNA. Over the past 2 decades, advances in genetic science have transformed the field of archaeology, allowing researchers to extract and analyze the DNA of mummified remains to determine familial relationships, disease histories, and even geographic origins. In the case of ancient Egypt's royal family, particularly the complex lineage of the Amarna period, DNA analysis seemed like the key that might finally connect the dots and possibly identify Nefertiti's remains. The project that brought this hope to the forefront was led by Dr. Zahi Hawass, Egypt's former Minister of Antiquities, in collaboration with a team of geneticists and forensic scientists. Between 2007 and 2010, they conducted one of the most extensive DNA studies of royal mummies ever attempted. The goal was to clarify the genealogy of Tutankhamun and the 18th dynasty, a task made more urgent by the gaps in the historical record, caused by Akhenaten's religious revolution and the deliberate erasure of key individuals from monuments and tomb inscriptions, including Nefertiti. Central to this effort was the analysis of several mummies believed to be part of the Amarna royal lineage. Among them was the now famous Younger Lady, a severely damaged female mummy discovered in tomb KV35 in the Valley of the Kings. Though her face had been mutilated, possibly in antiquity, her body was sufficiently preserved to yield viable DNA samples. When the results came back, they made headlines. The Younger Lady was determined to be the mother of Tutankhamun. This single data point placed her at the heart of Egypt's royal family, but the next question was even more provocative. Could the Younger Lady actually be Nefertiti? On the surface, it seemed plausible. Nefertiti was Akhenaten's great royal wife and most prominent consort. If she were also the mother of Tutankhamun, the case for identifying her as the Younger Lady would be strengthened. However, this is where the science met its limits. While the DNA confirmed that the Younger Lady was Tutankhamun's mother, it also showed that she was a full sibling of his father, presumed to be Akhenaten. This suggested that Tutankhamun was the product of a brother-sister union, a not uncommon practice among Egyptian royalty who sought to preserve divine bloodlines. But here's the problem. No evidence exists that Nefertiti was Akhenaten's sister. In fact, most Egyptologists believe she was not of royal blood at all, at least not directly descended from the 18th dynasty's main line. Some scholars argue she may have been the daughter of Ai, a high-ranking official, but her exact origins remain unclear. If she was not Akhenaten's sister, then genetically she could not be the Younger Lady, and so the case begins to unravel. If the Younger Lady isn't Nefertiti, then her remains have either not been found or have not yet been recognized. Other possibilities include the mummies from tomb KV21, two females found in poor condition. DNA testing on one of them, labeled KV21A, suggested a maternal link to fetuses buried with Tutankhamun, implying she could have been his wife, possibly Ankhesenamun, Nefertiti's daughter. But again, the data was degraded and inconclusive. Adding further complications are the inherent difficulties of working with ancient DNA. Egyptian mummies are notoriously challenging for genetic analysis. The embalming process involved chemicals and resins that often destroyed soft tissue and degraded genetic material. Add to that thousands of years of heat, humidity, and microbial contamination, and you're left with fragments, partial genomes, that offer suggestive hints, but not definitive answers. To date, no mummy has been conclusively identified as Nefertiti based on DNA. Even as techniques improve, the limitations of the available samples and the ambiguities of royal lineage continue to confound efforts to extract a clear genetic signature. The few clues we do have, like the Younger Lady's identity and the tangled genetic relationships of the Amarna royals, offer tantalizing glimpses into the complexity of Egypt's ruling family, but fall short of solving the central mystery. The absence of definitive genetic evidence doesn't just frustrate scientists, it reinforces a broader historical truth. The Amarna period was designed in many ways to break with tradition. In doing so, it created a gap in the record. Names were erased, tombs destroyed, and lineage confused. Nefertiti, who once stood at the apex of that world, became its most conspicuous absence. Still, hope remains. With each new discovery, whether it's a new burial site, another mummy, or even a new method of DNA extraction, there's a chance that the mystery of Nefertiti's remains could finally be solved. Advances in next-generation sequencing, which allow researchers to reconstruct entire genomes from highly degraded samples, may one day offer the breakthrough that traditional methods couldn't. Until then, her name remains synonymous with unanswered questions. Who was she truly? Did she rule as a pharaoh after Akhenaten's death? Was she buried in Amarna, in the Valley of the Kings, or perhaps behind a sealed wall in a tomb already known to us? The science has advanced. The search continues. But for now, the genetic trail goes cold. For over 4,500 years, the Great Sphinx of Giza has stared silently across the desert sands, its gaze fixed toward the rising sun. Carved from a single ridge of limestone, the Sphinx remains one of the most iconic and enigmatic monuments in human history. Towering 66 feet tall and stretching 240 feet long, its colossal form seems to defy both time and explanation. While mainstream Egyptology places its construction during the reign of Pharaoh Khafra around 2500 BCE, not all experts agree. And some of the most puzzling questions about the Sphinx aren't about when it was carved, but what lies beneath it. For centuries, legends have swirled around the Sphinx. Stories from ancient Egyptian texts, Greek historians, Islamic chronicles, and modern mystics all point to the same tantalizing idea: that beneath the paws of the Sphinx, hidden chambers or secret passageways contain ancient knowledge, treasures, or sacred relics. These tales, some mythical, others rooted in early archaeology, persist not because they've been proven, but because no one has yet been able to disprove them entirely. Part of what fuels this intrigue is the monument's sheer lack of written history. Unlike most temples and tombs in Egypt, the Sphinx contains no inscriptions identifying its builder or purpose, no cartouches, no dedications, no hieroglyphic guidance. It's an architectural enigma, massive, precise, and oddly silent. Even the ancient Egyptians of later dynasties referred to it as Shesep-Ankh, the living image, suggesting that they too viewed the monument as something already ancient in their time. Over the years, multiple investigations have attempted to unravel the Sphinx's secrets. In the 1920s and 30s, French and Egyptian teams excavated around the monument, clearing away sand that had buried its body up to the neck for most of its existence. They uncovered tunnels carved into its body, some natural, others man-made, but none seemed to lead to anything significant. Still, the idea persisted: something must be hidden underneath. In the late 20th century, this mystery reached a new level of public attention thanks to both independent researchers and fringe theorists. Among the most famous was Edgar Cayce, a 20th century American mystic who claimed that a haul of records containing ancient knowledge from a lost civilization, possibly Atlantis, was buried beneath the Sphinx's paws. While Cayce's predictions were not based on any archaeological evidence, they captured the public's imagination and motivated further scientific inquiry. Interestingly, as bizarre as Cayce's claims may have sounded, some modern studies began to yield data that reignited the discussion, not because they confirmed mythical hauls, but because they suggested anomalies that could not be easily explained away. In the 1990s, a team of researchers led by seismologist Thomas DeBecke and geologist Thomas L. Dobbs conducted seismic studies around the base of the Sphinx. The goal was to understand the subsurface structure of the bedrock and evaluate erosion patterns. What they discovered surprised many. Their data revealed hollow areas beneath the monument, especially under the paws and along the flanks. These anomalies could be naturally occurring fissures, or they could be cavities, perhaps man-made, that have yet to be explored. Another prominent figure, geologist Dr. Robert Schoch, added to the controversy by analyzing the Sphinx's erosion patterns. He observed that the deep vertical weathering on the enclosure walls appeared to be the result of prolonged water exposure, specifically rainfall, rather than mere desert wind and sand. Schoch argued that such erosion could only have occurred if the Sphinx had existed during a much wetter period in Egypt's climate history, possibly as far back as 7,000 to 5,000 BCE. If correct, this would mean the Sphinx predates not only Khafre, but the entire dynastic timeline of Egypt. Mainstream Egyptologists largely reject these conclusions, pointing out that limestone erosion is highly variable and can be influenced by many factors, beyond rainfall. They also note that nearby structures associated with Khafre's pyramid show architectural continuity that strongly supports the conventional dating of the Sphinx. Still, Schoch's geological evidence, combined with seismic data showing potential cavities beneath the monument, raises questions that haven't been fully answered. Despite decades of research, no one has been allowed to excavate directly beneath the Sphinx. Egyptian authorities, concerned about preserving the integrity of the structure, have refused permits for drilling or tunneling. Their stance is understandable. The Sphinx is already heavily weathered, and any invasive investigation risks further damage to a monument that has survived more than 4 millennia of wind, sand, and human interference. And yet, the mystery endures, not only because of fringe theories, but because even careful, credible scientific inquiry has yielded more questions than answers. Why was the Sphinx built in the first place? What purpose did it serve? Why does it bear the body of a lion and the face of a human? And above all, why is it so silent in the historical record? As modern archaeology evolves, new tools like thermal imaging, 3D scanning, and muon tomography offer hope of exploring the Sphinx's subsurface without harm. But until more definitive surveys are conducted and verified, the question remains suspended in uncertainty. The Great Sphinx continues to guard its secrets, as it always has. Towering, mute, and immovable, it dares us to ask, but refuses to answer. And for now, that silence is the closest we've come to the truth. The allure of the Great Sphinx is not just in its monumental scale or ancient mystery, but in the frustrating precision of its silence. For more than a century, scientists and archaeologists have tried to break through that silence using the best tools available. And yet, despite decades of effort and the deployment of cutting-edge technology, we still don't have definitive answers about what lies beneath its paws, or even whether we should expect anything there at all. The modern scientific study of the Sphinx began in earnest during the late 20th century, when non-invasive technologies started to become more reliable and widely available. One of the first serious methods applied was seismic refraction, used in the 1990s by a joint Egyptian-American team led by Dr. Thomas Dobecki and Dr. Thomas Dobbs. Their objective was not to prove myths or chase legends, but to understand the geological composition of the bedrock and detect structural anomalies. What they found was surprising. The seismic data showed significant differences in the density of the limestone below the Sphinx, suggesting the presence of hollow spaces. To the public, this was interpreted as a sign of hidden chambers. To geologists, it was less clear-cut. Hollow spaces might be the result of natural limestone faults or erosion pockets, or they might be human-made, cut deliberately for religious, symbolic, or practical purposes. But without excavation, seismic anomalies alone cannot confirm the difference. These ambiguities lie at the heart of the Sphinx mystery. We have the technology to ask better questions, but often not the legal or scientific freedom to pursue clear answers. In the 2000s, further advancements led to the use of ground-penetrating radar, GPR, around the base of the Sphinx. Unlike seismic methods that detect vibration changes, GPR sends electromagnetic pulses into the Earth and records the reflected signals to identify variations in material composition. These studies found areas beneath the paws and body of the Sphinx where radar waves bounced back in patterns consistent with cavities or voids. Again, the results were intriguing but inconclusive. The interpretations varied depending on who was analyzing the data, what frequency was used, and how deep the radar penetrated. A 2006 GPR study, for instance, identified several subsurface anomalies beneath and around the monument, including what appeared to be a rectangular cavity near the Sphinx's right paw. That immediately sparked comparisons to Edgar Cayce's long-dismissed prophecy about the Hall of Records hidden beneath the monument. The media latched onto it. However, Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, under the leadership of Dr. Zahi Hawass, dismissed the more sensational claims. Hawass acknowledged the anomalies, but emphasized they were likely natural or structural, not evidence of hidden temples or ancient archives. He maintained that until further data confirmed otherwise, no excavation would be permitted. Then came thermal imaging, a method that detects temperature variations on surfaces. In 2015, a team working as part of Egypt's Scan Pyramids project used infrared thermography on several ancient sites, including the Sphinx. Their goal was to detect subsurface inconsistencies in the stone by measuring differences in heat retention and radiation, particularly useful for identifying hidden voids, cracks, or previously unknown construction techniques. Initial results showed areas around the paws and lower flanks of the Sphinx with elevated thermal anomalies. These spots heated up and cooled down at rates inconsistent with the surrounding rock, suggesting the possibility of air pockets or internal spaces. Still, nothing definitive followed. The anomalies were real, but their cause once again was unknown. Thermal imaging, like radar and seismic scans, provides indirect evidence. It tells you something is different, but not what that something is. And with ancient monuments, like the Sphinx, where preservation is paramount, indirect evidence is all we have. Adding to the complexity are the political and bureaucratic constraints surrounding archaeological exploration in Egypt. The Sphinx is not only a national treasure, it is a global symbol of Egyptian identity and pride. For good reason, authorities are cautious about approving any intervention that could risk the monument's integrity. That means any request to drill, insert probes, or excavate, no matter how small, must pass through layers of official review. And because past controversies, often driven by outsiders with questionable motives, have damaged trust, those approvals are rarely granted. This leaves researchers in a paradox. They have increasingly sophisticated tools, 3D imaging, laser scanning, muon detectors, and even autonomous drones capable of subterranean mapping. But the most direct way to confirm what lies beneath the Sphinx, digging, is effectively off-limits, and understandably so. One crack in the limestone, one miscalculated intrusion, and we could permanently scar a monument that has stood for nearly 5 millennia. Some scientists advocate for a compromise, using robotic micro-drilling to insert fiber optic cameras into confirmed voids, or deploying small tunneling drones that can navigate beneath the base from adjacent safe zones. These proposals have been discussed at academic conferences but have yet to gain official sanction. For now, the approach remains cautious. Study from a distance, build digital models, compare geological readings, and wait for either a technological breakthrough or a shift in policy. Ultimately, what science has revealed is not definitive proof of chambers, but a consistent pattern of unknowns, anomalies that appear across multiple technologies and across decades of study. They don't confirm myths, but they don't fully dismiss them either. They exist in the gray zone between data and interpretation, between what we suspect and what we can prove. In that sense, the Great Sphinx is not just a monument, it's a boundary. A place where ancient knowledge meets modern inquiry, and where even our most advanced tools must reckon with the past's ability to hide what it chooses. It challenges us to keep asking, keep refining, and keep exploring, without ever assuming the answers will come easily. For all the technological effort poured into studying the Great Sphinx, radar scans, thermal imaging, geological surveys, it's easy to overlook that the biggest questions about the monument might not be physical, but symbolic. Why was it built in the first place? Who ordered its construction? What did it represent to the people who carved it? And how has that meaning changed over time? These aren't questions radar can answer. They live in the space between archaeology and philosophy, in what the Sphinx has come to symbolize not just in ancient Egypt, but across thousands of years of cultural imagination. Traditionally, mainstream Egyptology identifies the Sphinx as having been built during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre, who ruled during the 4th dynasty around 2500 BCE. The face of the Sphinx is thought to resemble Khafre himself, and its proximity to his pyramid lends architectural and contextual support to that idea. In this reading, the Sphinx served as a guardian of the Giza plateau, a divine sentinel watching over the necropolis and the rising sun. Its lion body, a symbol of strength and divine protection, combined with the pharaoh's head, symbolized the fusion of human wisdom and animal power. A ruler empowered by the gods, overseeing both life and death. But not everyone agrees. One of the most persistent challenges to this traditional view comes from scholars who point to the erosion on the Sphinx's body and the style of its features. Some geologists, like Dr. Robert Schoch, believe the vertical weathering on the enclosure walls indicates water erosion, something that would require the Sphinx to have been exposed to heavy rainfall thousands of years before Khafre's time. This would push its construction date back to around 7000 to 5000 BCE, during a period when Egypt was not thought to have any organized civilization capable of creating such a structure. If true, this would not only rewrite Egyptian history, but challenge our understanding of early human society. Other interpretations look beyond the geology and into the symbolism embedded in the Sphinx's orientation and positioning. The monument faces directly east, aligning almost perfectly with the rising sun on the equinox. To the ancient Egyptians, solar worship was deeply embedded in their religious worldview. The sun god Ra, and later the Aten, were central figures. In the pantheon, the Sphinx's unwavering gaze toward the dawn has led some scholars to suggest that it represents a solar deity or a form of Ra himself. In this light, the Sphinx becomes not just a guardian, but a manifestation of cosmic order, watching the rebirth of the sun each day, an eternal witness to divine cycles. The lack of inscriptions further fuels its mystique. In a culture that inscribed everything from tomb walls to temple ceilings, it's unusual, even suspicious, that a monument of this scale and importance would be left without a single identifying mark. This silence has given rise to alternate theories. Some suggest the Sphinx predates the dynastic Egyptians entirely and was merely adopted, repurposed or restored by Khafre and later pharaohs. Others claim that its face was recarved from an earlier structure, possibly representing a lion or another deity, before being altered to resemble a ruler. Then there's the myth of the Hall of Records, popularized by mystic Edgar Cayce in the 20th century. He claimed that beneath the Sphinx lies a chamber containing ancient texts from the lost civilization of Atlantis, records that predate Egyptian civilization and hold the secrets of humanity's origins. While mainstream archaeology dismisses this as pseudoscience, the idea continues to resonate with those who believe history contains deeper hidden layers that traditional narratives overlook. Casey's prophecies are unverifiable, but they've kept public attention fixed on the Sphinx for decades, and not without some interesting side effects. His predictions indirectly motivated researchers to conduct real, scientific studies beneath the monument. Studies that have, ironically, produced their own share of unexplained anomalies. More grounded interpretations focus on the Sphinx as part of a larger architectural and spiritual landscape. Some scholars believe that it, along with the pyramids and other nearby structures, was part of a symbolic blueprint, a celestial map reflecting Orion's belt, the Milky Way, or other star formations. In this model, the Sphinx doesn't stand alone. It acts as a celestial anchor, a terrestrial embodiment of the sun, stars, or divine order. Whether this design was intentional or coincidental remains debated, but the possibility underscores just how interconnected the physical, spiritual, and astronomical aspects of ancient Egyptian architecture could be. Despite its prominence, the Great Sphinx remains frustratingly difficult to categorize. It is not a temple, though it carries spiritual weight. It is not a tomb, though it guards a necropolis. It is not a statue of a god, yet it commands reverence like one. Its ambiguity is its power, and this ambiguity ensures its role not just as a subject of archaeological study, but as a cultural Rorschach test. People see in it what they bring to it, be it scientific curiosity, spiritual longing, or conspiratorial belief. What makes the mystery of the Sphinx enduring isn't just what may lie beneath it, but what it continues to inspire above ground. It challenges our understanding of time, legacy, and the relationship between civilization and myth. Whether it hides ancient chambers or stands alone in its enigmatic grandeur, it reminds us that not all questions are meant to be answered quickly, and not all answers lie beneath the surface. To understand the spiritual core of ancient Egypt, you must go to Karnak. Located in modern-day Luxor, Karnak wasn't just a temple, it was a vast, living city of gods. Over more than 2,000 years, it became the most sacred religious complex in Egypt, dedicated primarily to Amun-Ra, the king of the gods. But while its towering columns, intricate hieroglyphs, and colossal statues tell a story of devotion and divine power, there's a crucial part of that story missing: the daily rituals and secrets of the priests who lived and worked there. These were rites never meant for public knowledge, mysteries that modern science still can't fully explain. Stretching over 200 acres, Karnak wasn't built all at once. Pharaoh after pharaoh contributed to its design, adding shrines, obelisks, pylons, and sacred lakes. By the time of the New Kingdom, Karnak was not only the most important religious center in Egypt, but also a symbol of the divine right of kings. Yet even amid its grandeur, the heart of the temple, the innermost sanctuaries, was off limits to the public. These spaces were reserved for priests, who performed rituals that were as secretive as they were sacred. They followed a strict schedule of purification, offerings, and ceremonial acts that reinforced Egypt's cosmic order. And yet, almost none of these rituals were recorded in full detail. Why? Because in ancient Egyptian theology, the power of ritual wasn't in its performance alone, it was in its secrecy. To expose sacred rites to outsiders would be to diminish their effectiveness. The priests, who functioned as both administrators and spiritual intermediaries, were trained not only in the technical aspects of ceremony, but also in the protection of sacred knowledge. The deeper the secrecy, the closer to the gods. What we do know about these rituals comes from scattered wall reliefs, temple inscriptions, and the writings of later observers, especially Greek historians like Herodotus, who visited Egypt centuries. After many of its temples were already in decline, he wrote with awe about the rituals and processions he witnessed, but admitted he was only allowed to see fragments. Much of what took place behind closed doors remained deliberately opaque, even to Egypt's foreign visitors. At the core of the daily ritual cycle at Karnak was the cult statue of Amun, housed in the temple's holiest of holies. Every morning, just before dawn, a group of high-ranking priests would enter the inner sanctuary. The rituals began with purification. The priests would wash themselves in the temple's sacred lake, burn incense, and don linen garments. Once cleansed, they would awaken the god, symbolically bringing Amun to life for the day. They would then perform a detailed sequence of acts, opening the doors of the shrine, unveiling the statue, offering food, water, wine and perfumes, and reciting sacred hymns. These offerings weren't just symbolic, they were believed to nourish the gods, just as food nourished mortals. After the offerings, the shrine would be sealed again, and the statue returned to rest, hidden away until the next day's ritual. But even these known details are incomplete. How exactly were certain hymns chanted? What was the rhythm of the incense rituals? Were there musical accompaniments? These questions linger because the priesthood operated within strict boundaries of oral tradition. The most sacred rites were never written down. They were passed from master to apprentice, generation after generation, behind temple walls. In addition to daily rituals, Karnak was the epicenter of major festival processions, especially the Opet festival, one of the most mysterious and grandiose events in the Theban calendar. Once a year, the statue of Amun would be removed from Karnak and carried in a ceremonial bark down the Nile to the Luxor temple, accompanied by music, incense, dancers, and a select group of priests. This wasn't just a parade. It was a reenactment of divine union and cosmic rejuvenation. Yet again, the exact details of the ceremony remain elusive. Who was allowed to see the god's statue? What prayers were spoken at each stop along the way? How were the barks navigated and guarded? The visual record, carved on temple walls, shows only the broad strokes. Even modern excavations at Karnak struggle to uncover more than what was meant to be seen. The problem isn't the lack of material, it's the precision of what was omitted. Temples like Karnak weren't just religious centers, they were information filters. What they revealed was as important as what they deliberately concealed. Archaeologists and Egyptologists continue to study the temple using tools like photogrammetry, LiDAR scanning, and 3D modeling to understand its layout and ritual function. But while these methods reveal architectural secrets, the alignment of halls, the sequence of construction phases, they don't decode the rituals themselves. That knowledge was oral, performative, and ultimately spiritual, and so Karnak remains a paradox. It is the best preserved temple complex from ancient Egypt, but the least understood in terms of its inner workings. Its stones hold vast information, yet the core experience, the secret rhythm of divine interaction, is lost. Or perhaps not lost, but locked away, intentionally hidden by the very priests who believed that sacred truth should never be fully revealed. To the priests of Karnak, ritual wasn't just a daily routine, it was a cosmic performance. Every gesture, offering, and recitation was calculated to align Egypt's physical world with the divine, and nowhere is that more apparent than in the temple's architecture itself. Karnak wasn't just built, it was designed to embody the celestial order. Its corridors, pylons, and sacred lakes were not random. They were cosmological instruments, but the full depth of how these alignments influenced the rituals within remains an unsolved mystery, one that modern science is only beginning to approach. 1. Of the most striking features of Karnak Temple is its precise alignment with astronomical events. The temple's main axis is oriented toward the winter solstice sunrise. On that day, once a year, the rising sun shines directly down the central corridor, illuminating the innermost sanctuary where the statue of Amun was once kept. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a deliberate design choice meant to synchronize the temple's spiritual energy with the cycles of the cosmos. What this alignment meant to the priests, however, goes beyond the visual spectacle. It likely marked a moment of ritual renewal when divine energy was thought to flow most strongly into the sacred space. Some scholars believe the winter solstice ritual at Karnak may have symbolized the rebirth of the sun and, by extension, the rejuvenation of the king and the state. Yet because no written ritual record survives from inside the sanctuary itself, the details of what was done or said during this celestial event remain speculative. Outside the stone corridors and solar alignments, the temple complex also housed sacred animals, most notably within its sacred lake. The presence of these animals, particularly geese and fish, wasn't ornamental. In Egyptian religion, animals were living symbols of divine forces. Certain species were associated with specific gods. In the case of Amun, ram-headed imagery. And animal symbolism played a major role in both temple decoration and worship. But here again, the precise ritual role of these animals remains unclear. Were they merely symbolic presences, or were they participants in living ceremonies? Some researchers suggest that animal life in Karnak's sacred lake may have been part of purification rites or used in divination rituals. However, the lack of direct textual evidence leaves us to piece together clues from iconography, comparative temple records, and careful excavation. One example of this obscurity is the daily ritual text, a known script used at other temples to describe the general sequence of worship. At temples like Edfu and Dendera, detailed versions of these texts survive, outlining the offerings, incantations, and ceremonial tasks. But at Karnak, these records are fragmentary at best, and even when partial texts exist, they often omit the esoteric core. The mystical acts or priestly utterances meant only for initiated eyes and ears. The most sacred knowledge was never meant to be written. Adding another layer to the mystery is Karnak's network of subterranean chambers and sealed rooms, many of which remain unexplored or partially excavated. Some of these chambers appear to have been used for storing ritual objects, statues, barks, votive offerings, while others may have served as hiding places during political upheaval or invasions. But it's entirely possible that some of these rooms were used in esoteric rituals, known only to the highest-ranking members of the priesthood. Several of these hidden spaces are carved beneath or within the thick stone walls of the temple's central precinct. In some cases, they are accessible only through narrow vertical shafts, suggesting that these chambers were designed not just to be hidden, but to be inaccessible, except during very specific ritual moments. Archaeologists have uncovered caches of ritual tools, statues, and even scroll fragments in these concealed spaces, but their function remains debated. Were these objects buried as part of sacred retirements? Were they instruments used only once a year, or were they part of ceremonies that modern Egyptology has no framework to interpret? And then there are the mystery cults, subsidiary religious groups that operated within the broader temple context. Some scholars believe that Karnak may have hosted small, elite circles of priest-magicians who conducted secret rites in the service of Amun or other deities. These rites may have included dream incubation, star observation, or even controlled use of psychoactive substances to induce divine visions. While such theories remain speculative, they are supported by indirect evidence. Unusual architectural features, graffiti hidden deep in the temple walls, and references in later Greco-Roman texts to Egyptian priesthoods performing mysteries inaccessible to the common believer. Modern attempts to decode these elements have turned to digital archaeology. By reconstructing Karnak in 3D simulations, researchers are able to test how light, sound, and processional movement functioned within the temple space. These models reveal that echoes, shadows, and sunbeams were not accidental. They were part of the spiritual choreography. The priests weren't just performing rituals. They were orchestrating experiences intended to invoke awe, induce spiritual transformation, and maintain cosmic harmony. But the most sacred layer of the temple, what the priests whispered in the shadows, what they saw in trance states, what they invoked when the sanctuary doors were sealed, remains beyond recovery. The rituals were designed to be forgotten by the uninitiated, known only to the gods and those chosen to serve them. And even as archaeology evolves, that boundary between the seen and the unseen, the recorded and the remembered, still holds firm. Karnak remains a riddle wrapped in granite, a spiritual engine whose form is preserved, but whose function is still cloaked in divine secrecy. Despite more than a century of excavation study and digital modeling, Karnak Temple continues to withhold its deepest truths. Even today, it stands not only as an architectural wonder, but as a symbol of what Egypt refuses to give up easily, its spiritual core. For archaeologists, the frustration is palpable. The stone speaks, but only in fragments. The inscriptions are clear, but carefully edited. The layout reveals intention, but not interpretation. And always, just beyond the next wall or under the next block, there lies the possibility of something more. A sealed chamber, a hidden stairway, a ritual vault untouched for thousands of years. Some of Karnak's most intriguing areas remain physically off-limits. These forbidden zones are not always declared as such, but are treated with institutional hesitation. Certain corridors in the inner sanctuaries, certain sealed doorways, and even specific shafts, identified through scanning and remote sensing, have yet to be opened. The reasons vary. Some are logistical. Massive blocks cannot be moved without endangering the structure. Others are political. National pride, international pressure, and scholarly disputes over ownership of discoveries. And some reasons are, frankly, spiritual. There is still a sense, even among secular archaeologists, that some parts of Karnak may be better left undisturbed, at least until we understand more. One of the most compelling modern efforts to penetrate these zones is the use of muon tomography, the same technique that detected a previously unknown chamber in the Great Pyramid of Giza. Muons are subatomic particles generated by cosmic rays. They pass harmlessly through stone and can be tracked to create imaging of large, dense objects. When applied to ancient structures, they reveal cavities where conventional radar or ultrasound might fail. Preliminary efforts to use muon scans at Karnak are underway, and while results remain unpublished, early data has hinted at voids in unexpected places that do not align with any known architectural plan. Why were these areas hidden? What did the priests conceal so carefully? And why has no one opened them in all this time? The truth may be mundane: abandoned storage rooms, construction irregularities, but the setting makes it difficult to dismiss more extraordinary possibilities. In a temple where the line between physical architecture and spiritual cosmos was deliberately blurred, an empty space might have been more than just empty. It might have been sacred. Adding to this mystery is the lack of human remains within Karnak itself. Unlike tomb complexes or even smaller temples, where burials of priests or sacred animals are common, Karnak yields almost nothing in this regard. The absence is curious. For a site that functioned as a religious epicenter for over 2 millennia, why does it show so little evidence of the people who served there day after day, year after year? Were priestly burials kept entirely separate, perhaps in secret cemeteries? Or were cremations, dismemberments, or ritual dissolutions performed as part of initiation or sacrifice rites we no longer recognize? Some modern scholars believe that certain rituals involved permanent transformations, not of the body, but of the initiate's identity. Ancient texts speak of becoming one with the god, shedding the name, or ascending in the light. These aren't metaphors in Egyptian theology. They are descriptions of mystical experiences. Could it be that the priests of Karnak went through initiation processes that removed them entirely from the mortal world, at least symbolically? If so, the temple may have operated not just as a house of worship, but as a spiritual forge, a place where identities were dismantled and rebuilt under divine authority. In this context, the silence of Karnak is not an absence. It is an intention. The temple was never meant to explain itself. Its rituals were not made for public display or posterity. They were performed with the full expectation that they would disappear once completed, leaving only residue in the stone, echoes in the layout, and an uneasy sense in modern scholars that something crucial is missing. The question then becomes one of ethics as much as exploration. Should every mystery be solved? Should we force open doors designed to remain closed, interpret rites that were guarded for millennia? Archaeology often positions itself as the pursuit of knowledge, but Karnak challenges us to consider the weight of that knowledge, the cultural, spiritual, and historical consequences of discovering what we may not be prepared to understand. Even so, the effort continues. Teams from Egypt, France, Germany, and the United States work tirelessly to conserve, document, and interpret Karnak's sprawling complex. Each year brings new discoveries: a buried sphinx here, a lost shrine there, fragments of a ceremony recorded in an overlooked chamber. But these are glimpses, brief flashes of clarity in an otherwise vast and deliberate fog. In the end, Karnak's power is not just in what it reveals, but in what it withholds. It's a monument not only to the divine, but to human restraint. A place where generations of priests once carried out rituals meant to preserve the very order of the universe, trusting that their silence would protect what their hands created. And so far, it has. Deep beneath the desert sands of Saqqara, hidden in a subterranean labyrinth, lies one of the most confounding engineering mysteries of ancient Egypt, the Serapeum. Carved into the bedrock and stretching for hundreds of meters, this underground complex houses a series of massive granite boxes, some weighing up to 70 tons, positioned with surgical precision in narrow chambers. These are not temples or tombs. They are sarcophagi unlike any others in Egypt, and yet they are empty. No bodies, no inscriptions, no clear answers. Just silence and impossibility. First discovered in the 1850s by Auguste Mariette, the Serapeum was originally thought to be a burial site for the sacred Apis bulls, animals worshipped as manifestations of the god Ptah, and later Osiris Apis, or Serapis. According to traditional belief, these bulls were mummified and entombed with great ceremony. The size of the boxes seemed to match this purpose, and for a time that explanation held. But then came the contradictions. Most of the 24 granite boxes in the main corridors are entirely empty. No bull mummies, no grave goods, no carvings, and perhaps most puzzling of all, no inscriptions whatsoever. In a culture that documented everything from royal decrees to laundry lists, the total lack of hieroglyphs is almost unnatural. These boxes are utterly mute. Even in tombs meant to honor animals, some level of dedication or prayer is usually carved or painted. Here, nothing. Not even a name. The mystery deepens when you consider the engineering. Each sarcophagus is carved from a single block of solid granite, either red granite from Aswan or black diorite, some of the hardest stones on Earth. The precision is astonishing. The interior corners are perfectly squared. The surfaces are Smooth to within a fraction of a millimeter. The lids fit so tightly that even a sheet of paper couldn't slide between them. These are feats of stonework that would challenge modern-day CNC machinery. And yet they were supposedly carved over 3,000 years ago using copper tools and sand. Take a moment to grasp what that means. Moving a 70-ton box through narrow tunnels, carved deep into bedrock, is already a logistical nightmare. But carving it first to near perfection off-site, and then moving it intact without a scratch, that's a level of engineering coordination that should have left behind all kinds of evidence: ramps, cranes, tool marks, transportation routes. Yet we have no records, no texts describing the process, no tools identified specifically for this kind of finish, no workshop ruins that could explain this level of mastery. So how were they made? Mainstream Egyptologists suggest that with enough time, manpower, and determination, the ancient builders could have used stone hammers and abrasives to slowly shape the granite. And while this is plausible in theory, it doesn't explain the extreme tolerances or consistent perfection across so many examples. More importantly, it doesn't explain why they went to such extraordinary lengths for animal burials that weren't even marked. That's where the theories begin to spiral. Some researchers have suggested the boxes were never sarcophagi at all. Instead, they may have served symbolic or energetic purposes, containers not for remains, but for sacred concepts. Perhaps they were meant to house the ka, or spiritual essence of divine beings. Others speculate that they were resonance chambers, used in mysterious rituals long since forgotten. The acoustics of the chambers are peculiar. Some researchers claim that sounds made inside the sarcophagi reverberate in strange, amplified patterns, suggesting they may have been used in sonic or spiritual ceremonies. Still, others have taken the mystery further, linking the Serapeum to lost technologies, not necessarily aliens, as fringe theorists like to imagine, but a high-level understanding of mechanics, geometry, and resonance that we've only recently begun to rediscover. In this view, the boxes are relics of a forgotten chapter in human history, one where sacred architecture and engineering were one and the same. And yet, despite all the speculation, the central facts remain unchanged. Massive boxes, precisely, carved, eerily empty and functionally unexplained. There is, of course, one possible explanation that haunts all others. We're not asking the right question. Perhaps the Serapeum wasn't built as a tomb or a warehouse, but as something entirely different, something whose purpose doesn't align with our assumptions about religion, death, or ritual. Maybe the boxes weren't meant to contain something at all. Maybe they were meant to exclude, to prevent, to guard, to seal something away, or someone. It's this ambiguity that gives the Serapeum its unique grip on the imagination. Unlike the pyramids or the temples of Karnak, it offers no story, no narrative, no cultural key. It is pure enigma, precision without purpose, monument without memory, And perhaps that's what makes it the most honest of all Egypt's ancient wonders. Where other structures tell us what their builders wanted us to believe, the Serapeum tells us only that something incredible was done here, and that no one, thousands of years later, can yet say why. If the Serapeum were found in isolation, just a few odd boxes in the desert, it might be dismissed as a strange experiment or architectural anomaly. But that's not what it is. The Serapeum is part of a larger pattern in ancient Egypt, moments of technological brilliance that don't align with the rest of what we think we know. The colossal sarcophagi are just the clearest example, a sharp break from the expected capabilities of a Bronze Age society. When you compare the Serapeum boxes to similar structures from the same period, the contrast is jarring. Elsewhere in Egypt, tombs and burial containers from the New Kingdom and late period, roughly the same era when the Serapeum was believed to be in active use, are finely made, but not impossibly so. They often include hieroglyphs, religious texts, and decorative imagery. Stone coffins, while large, are usually modest in precision. You can see tool marks, chisel lines, and minor imperfections. They're human in scale and in effort. The serapeums. Granite boxes are something else entirely. They're cold, silent, machined. They don't carry the artistic fingerprint of devotion. They carry the engineering imprint of purpose. So what was that purpose? The most conventional theory is the one presented by Mariette himself. These were burial chambers for Apis bulls, and the serapeum was a kind of sacred vault for animals worshipped as divine incarnations. In ancient Egyptian religion, the Apis bull was a powerful symbol of fertility, strength, and connection to the afterlife. When an Apis bull died, it was embalmed and given a ritual burial that rivaled that of pharaohs. According to this view, the massive sarcophagi were a reflection of the bull's spiritual importance, but this theory has major cracks. Of the 24 boxes discovered in the main galleries of the serapeum, only a few showed traces of remains, charred, bone fragments, partial wrappings, or embalming residue, and even in those cases, the scale of the sarcophagus far exceeded what was necessary to house a single animal. In the majority of chambers, the boxes were entirely empty. No remains, no offerings, no signs of ever having been used. Just pristine, echoing chambers carved into the bedrock and filled with sealed, hollow stone. This has led to other theories. One proposes that the boxes were symbolic, not tombs, but vessels for containing metaphysical energy. The ancient Egyptians believed deeply in the concept of the ka, or spiritual essence. Some researchers suggest that the boxes were designed not to store bodies, but to house and stabilize the divine essence of the Apis bulls, even after death. In this view, the boxes were not coffins, but containment vessels, like batteries or resonators for sacred power. Another theory looks at the acoustic properties of the chambers. Inside the serapeum, sound behaves strangely. Certain frequencies reverberate for several seconds. A whispered voice can carry unnaturally far. Experiments by researchers and sound engineers suggest that the granite boxes act as resonant cavities, amplifying specific tones in ways that might have been ritually significant. This has led some to propose that the serapeum was designed as an acoustic temple, where chants, hymns, or ritual sounds could interact with the architecture to produce altered states of consciousness, divine communication, or even healing. Yet even this doesn't explain the precision. The surfaces of the interiors are smooth and squared to a tolerance that would be difficult to achieve today without laser-guided equipment. Engineers who've examined the boxes often raise the same question: how did the builders hollow out a 70-ton block of granite to such perfection, using only stone tools? Modern machining specialists have tried to replicate similar finishes with traditional tools and materials. The results are usually far rougher and more time-consuming. Experiments with copper chisels, sand abrasives, and pounding stones yield measurable results, but nowhere near the accuracy seen in the serapeum boxes. Some experts believe the boxes were shaped using some form of rotational grinding or unknown mechanical method that isn't preserved in the archaeological record. In short, we don't know how they did it. This has led to more speculative ideas, some bordering on fringe theory, others grounded in unexplored possibilities. One is that Egypt inherited knowledge from a pre-dynastic civilization, now lost to history. Another is that ancient builders developed lost techniques, mechanical, acoustic, or chemical, that we've simply forgotten or dismissed. A few even propose that the boxes were not Egyptian at all, but reused from a much older structure that predates known history and was integrated into Egyptian religious practice. Whatever the truth, it's clear that the sarcophagi of the serapeum defy easy categorization. They are too advanced to ignore, too mysterious to explain, and too unique to dismiss as mere anomalies. Whether they were tombs, temples, storage chambers, or something entirely outside our current understanding, they represent a kind of technological footprint, one that doesn't match the other prints around it. And so the Serapeum remains one of the strangest enigmas in Egypt. Not because it is grand or symbolic or beautiful, though it is all of those, but because it makes a simple, unsettling suggestion we may not be the first humans to master impossible things. In 2015, a theory was published that reignited one of the greatest mysteries in Egyptology, one that could finally link the boy king Tutankhamun to the most elusive figure of the Amarna age, Queen Nefertiti. The theory came not from a fringe theorist, but from a respected British archaeologist, Dr. Nicholas Reeves, and it sent shockwaves through the field. His claim that behind the painted walls of Tutankhamun's tomb, concealed beneath layers of plaster and pigment, lie sealed doorways, hidden chambers, possibly containing the undisturbed burial of Nefertiti herself. It began with high-resolution scans of the tomb, commissioned by Factum Arte, to create a full-scale replica for preservation purposes. While reviewing the images, Reeves noticed what appeared to be subtle vertical and horizontal lines beneath the paint on the north and west walls of the burial chamber. These lines, he argued, were architectural in nature, edges of previously plastered-over doorways, not merely decorative flaws or construction quirks, but signs that Tutankhamun's tomb was an extension of a pre-existing tomb, one originally intended for Nefertiti. It wasn't an outlandish idea. Tutankhamun died unexpectedly, likely in his late teens. His tomb, known as KV62, is unusually small and hastily finished for a pharaoh. Egyptologists have long suspected it was never meant for a king. If Nefertiti had ruled as pharaoh before, him under a different name, possibly as Smenkhkare, it's conceivable that her tomb was repurposed after Tutankhamun's sudden death. In Reeves's view, the layout of KV62, its unusual orientation, and the missing record of Nefertiti's burial all pointed to one conclusion. She was behind the wall. The world took notice. Egyptologists, historians, media outlets all speculated on what such a discovery could mean. If confirmed, it would be the most significant find since Howard Carter opened Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922. But hopes quickly collided with the cold reality of scientific scrutiny. To test the theory, Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities authorized a series of ground-penetrating radar (GPR) scans of the tomb's walls. The first scan, conducted by Japanese radar expert Hirokatsu Watanabe, seemed to support Reeves's claim. Watanabe reported anomalies, voids, behind the north wall, consistent with what one might expect from a hidden chamber. Egypt's then Minister of Antiquities even announced to the press that the tomb might indeed contain additional rooms. But the euphoria didn't last. Subsequent radar surveys, carried out by independent teams from National Geographic and the Polytechnic University of Turin, failed to replicate the initial findings. Their conclusions? No significant voids behind the painted walls. Any anomalies, they said, were likely due to natural features in the rock or inconsistencies in the plaster. The discrepancy sparked a wave of criticism. Was the original scan flawed? Were the later team's instruments calibrated differently? Had political pressure influenced either interpretation? The debate stalled, caught between the limitations of technology and the caution of conservation. You see, even if a hidden chamber exists, we can't simply break through the wall. The paintings on Tutankhamun's north wall are fragile and historically invaluable. They depict the burial ritual of the boy king, and any attempt to drill, cut, or probe could cause irreparable damage. Unlike modern walls, these are not just barriers. They're heritage, irreplaceable art fused with sacred meaning. Even inserting a fiber optic camera through a tiny borehole poses risks to the integrity of the pigments and plaster. So archaeologists stand at an impasse. The tomb may contain a secret. The tools exist to explore it, but the cost of being wrong is too high. In the years since the controversy began, some scholars have moved on, convinced the radar data is a dead end. Others continue to believe Reeves was right, just ahead of his time. Technological advancements like muon tomography, which uses cosmic rays to detect voids through dense rock, could eventually give us a non-invasive way to see what lies behind the walls without touching them. But as of now, no such scan has been approved for KV62. The situation has become as much a question of archaeological ethics as of evidence. How do we balance the pursuit of knowledge with the responsibility to preserve? At what point does the potential reward justify the risk? Meanwhile, Tutankhamun's tomb remains one of the most visited sites in Egypt. Tourists walk through its narrow halls, gaze at the golden sarcophagus, and stand just feet away from the wall that may or may not be hiding another royal burial. They take photos, they read plaques. They leave, unaware that they've stood beside one of the most controversial archaeological questions of the 21st century. And behind that wall, only silence. Whether it holds plastered stone or a lost queen remains unknown. In the 5th century BCE, the Greek historian Herodotus visited Egypt and recorded something that would mystify scholars for over 2,000 years. Near the ancient site of Hawara, south of Cairo, he described a structure unlike anything he had ever seen. A colossal labyrinth filled with thousands of interconnected rooms, chambers and halls so vast that even he, a seasoned traveler, was overwhelmed. He claimed it surpassed the pyramids in grandeur, and yet today nothing of that scale is visible above ground. Herodotus wasn't the only one to report it. Ancient writers like Strabo, Pliny the Elder, and Diodorus Siculus all mentioned a labyrinthine marvel at the same site. According to them, it housed temples, courts, and sacred enclosures for each of the Egyptian nomes, provinces, suggesting it was a sort of administrative and spiritual hub. But despite these consistent ancient testimonies, no such structure appears to exist today. There are ruins, yes, mud brick walls, scattered foundations, but nothing even close to the 3,000-room mega-complex the ancients so vividly described. So was it an exaggeration? A myth? A misunderstanding of something far simpler? Not according to the evidence, and certainly not according to modern science. In the late 1800s, British archaeologist Flinders Petrie led the first formal excavation of Hawara. He uncovered part of a platform made from gigantic limestone blocks, some over 10 feet thick. He also found sections of walls and a large rectangular layout. But Petrie came to a frustrating conclusion. The original labyrinth had likely been dismantled in antiquity, its stone repurposed by later builders, its grandeur reduced to foundations and rubble. Based on the scale of the substructure, however, Petrie believed the ancient accounts weren't exaggerating, only that we'd arrived far too late to see the building in its full form. For over a century, the site was largely ignored, written off as a mystery too far gone to pursue. But then came the 2000s, a team of researchers from Belgium and Egypt, working under the name Matterhorn Expedition, brought modern tools to an ancient problem. They used ground-penetrating radar, GPR, to scan beneath the surface of the Hawara Plateau, and what they found shocked the academic world. Their scans revealed a highly complex grid of geometric anomalies buried beneath the sand and silt. These patterns didn't resemble natural formations. They looked architectural, straight lines, right angles, symmetrical layouts, the hallmarks of artificial design. The structures appeared to stretch over an area more than 300 meters wide and several levels deep. But here's the catch. They lie beneath the water table. Over the millennia, rising groundwater and silt runoff from the nearby Bar Yusuf Canal have buried the site under layers of mud and shallow water, making excavation virtually impossible with current technology. Digging into such a site without compromising the structure or releasing contaminants poses a serious risk. The labyrinth, if it exists in any substantial form, is trapped in wet stone and clay, just a few meters below our feet and completely unreachable. The Mataha team submitted their findings. The scans were published, but shortly afterward, their access to the site was abruptly halted by Egyptian authorities. No official explanation was given. Since then, the deeper radar data has remained largely unpublished, and the site once again has slipped into quiet obscurity, which raises the question, why stop investigating? Is it because the water table truly makes excavation impossible, or is it something else? Perhaps caution. After all, raising expectations of a legendary discovery comes with enormous scrutiny. Or perhaps it's a matter of preservation. If the labyrinth does exist, digging could destroy it, dissolve walls, collapse ceilings, invite irreversible damage. Or maybe, as some critics have suggested, the results aren't as definitive as they appear. But those who've studied the data insist there is something down there. The shapes, angles, and layout are too ordered, too intentional. They match the dimensions of the labyrinth Herodotus described, not just metaphorically, but mathematically. And if that's true, the implications are staggering. A multi-level megalithic complex buried beneath the desert, designed with geometric precision and large enough to dwarf known temples of the time. That's more than archaeology, it's a revelation. A structure like that could redefine the architectural capabilities of Middle Kingdom Egypt. It would show a level of planning and subterranean engineering centuries ahead of its time. But for now, all we can do is wait. Until technology evolves, until the waters recede, until someone someday finds a way to peel back the earth without breaking what sleeps beneath it. The lost labyrinth at Hawara may be real. The scans say yes. The legends say yes. But the ground, the water, says not. Yet, long before archaeologists arrived at Hawara with ground-penetrating radar, ancient writers were telling stories too vast to ignore. The first and most famous was Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE. In his histories, he described a building near Lake Moeris, what we now associate with Hawara, that, in his words, surpassed even the pyramids. He claimed it had 3,000 rooms, split between above-ground chambers and subterranean halls, all interconnected in a confusing maze of stone. Priests, he said, guided visitors through it. Without them, he would have been utterly lost. It's not just Herodotus. A few centuries later, Strabo, the Greek geographer, also visited the region and confirmed the labyrinth's existence. He described a large rectangular structure with successive courts, columned halls, and corridors that seemed to double back on themselves. He even noted that some parts were already in ruin, but what remained was enough to impress him deeply. Then came Pliny the Elder, a Roman scholar and author of natural history. Pliny claimed the labyrinth was constructed during the reign of Pharaoh Amenemhat III, who ruled during the Middle Kingdom, around 1800 BCE. This attribution is crucial because Amenemhat III is known for major engineering projects, including water management systems and pyramids. If anyone could have commissioned a massive underground complex, it would have been him. So we have 3 major sources across 3 eras, all saying the same thing: a massive labyrinth once stood at Hawara. But there's more. The structure wasn't just vast, it was symbolic. Ancient texts hint that each room had cosmological and political significance. Some writers claimed the halls represented the provinces of Egypt, 42 in all, each with its own sacred chapel. Others believed the labyrinth served as a religious archive, a repository for texts, relics, and priestly knowledge. And here's the twist. No Egyptian inscription has ever directly confirmed it. We don't have a temple inscription saying, "Here lies the labyrinth." No wall relief shows it being built. No stela commemorates its design. It is as if the Egyptians, so meticulous in their record-keeping, deliberately erased the evidence or never intended to leave any. That mystery alone raises questions. Could the labyrinth have served a function too secret for public inscription? Was it a center of esoteric rites, used only by high priests and royal initiates? Or did it simply decay so completely that later dynasties forgot its true purpose? Regardless, the consistency of the classical descriptions gives us a solid starting point. Ancient authors don't always agree, but here they do. They describe a rectangular structure with layers of chambers, some above, some below, and a layout so intricate that it couldn't be navigated without a guide. Multiple sources, similar accounts, no modern ruins that match. Which brings us to the question, where did it go? Some believe it was intentionally buried to protect it. Others suggest it was dismantled stone by later rulers in need of building material. Still others argue it was never completely above ground, that the labyrinth was always a subterranean structure hidden just below the surface. But if that's true, if Herodotus, Strabo, and Pliny weren't exaggerating, then we may still be standing right on top of it. And now we finally have tools that can see through the sand. In 2008, a joint expedition between Egyptian and Belgian researchers, known as the Matterhorn expedition, set out to answer a question that had haunted archaeologists for over a century. Did the labyrinth at Hawara ever truly exist? And if so, is it still there? Instead of shovels and brushes, they brought ground-penetrating radar, GPR, a tool that sends electromagnetic pulses into the earth and records how they bounce back. Different materials reflect energy in different ways, creating images of buried walls, voids, and structural changes without the need for excavation. At first, the scan seemed like a long shot. The site had been dismissed by many scholars as completely destroyed, the stone robbed out in antiquity. Even the great Flinders Petrie, who excavated Hawara in the 1880s, believed there was nothing left to find except foundation blocks and damaged walls. But what the radar revealed contradicted everything. The data showed a massive series of geometric shapes beneath the sand, symmetrical patterns, rows of right angles, rectangular chambers arranged in a repeating grid-like formation. These weren't random. They mirrored what ancient writers had described: long corridors, stacked halls, chambers side by side, all lying beneath a thick layer of sediment. One of the researchers described it as an architectural blueprint buried under mud. Even more stunning, the scan suggested the underground complex extended across an area of over 300 meters. That's nearly the length of 3 football fields. If accurate, that would make it one of the largest ancient structures ever built, entirely subterranean. But just as interest peaked, access was revoked. Following the release of the preliminary results, the team's permits were suspended. The full radar data was never officially published in peer-reviewed journals. Independent archaeologists were denied entry. Requests to rescan the area were reportedly blocked by the Supreme Council of Antiquities. The reasons? Unclear. Some say it was bureaucracy, nothing more than a paperwork issue. Others believe the data wasn't as conclusive as early reports claimed. But for a growing number of researchers and observers, it seemed like something else: deliberate suppression. Why? Theories vary. Some say it was to avoid drawing international attention to a site that couldn't yet be protected. Others suggest deeper motives, protecting state narratives, avoiding sensationalism, or shielding future discoveries from premature exposure. What's not in doubt is the radar itself. The images exist. The patterns are real. And to those trained in interpreting underground scans, they look architectural, not geological, not natural. Designed, but we can't get to them, not yet, because the entire area is now underwater. Over the centuries, the Bahr Yusuf Canal, once a vital irrigation source, has raised the water table around Hawara. Today, most of the suspected labyrinth site sits under 1 to 3 meters of water-saturated clay and silt. It's not just a matter of digging, it's a matter of engineering a way to dig safely without collapsing the site or contaminating the groundwater. And with that, the trail goes cold. We know what the ancients said. We know what the scans suggest. But the Earth won't let us move forward, not until we solve the final mystery, how to excavate without destroying what we find. If we accept that the labyrinth at Hawara once existed, and the radar evidence strongly suggests that, it raises a much bigger question. What was it for? Ancient writers offer clues. Herodotus, Strabo, and others hint at the labyrinth's religious and administrative importance. They describe shrines, records, and sacred spaces for the nomes of Egypt. That suggests it was more than a building. It was a kind of national archive, a ceremonial hub where spiritual and governmental authority overlapped. Think of it as the Vatican, the Library of Congress, and a tomb complex rolled into one. Some Egyptologists believe the labyrinth was connected to Amenemhat III's mortuary, Hult, a complex system of rituals designed to keep a dead pharaoh's spirit active in the afterlife. In that case, the labyrinth might have been a spiritual machine, a physical space designed to channel, preserve, or magnify divine presence. Its endless corridors, false doors, and winding passages could have been more than symbolic. They may have had ritual function, but others go further. Some theorists argue that the labyrinth was a priestly initiation center, where chosen initiates underwent secret rites deep underground. In this view, the structure's confusion and complexity were intentional, not to deter enemies, but to filter minds. A kind of psychological gauntlet. The initiate enters disoriented, stripped of assumptions, and emerges, if they ever did, with knowledge only the gods were meant to bestow. Then there are the architectural anomalies. Why build something so big, underground? The engineering challenge alone would be massive. Ventilation, drainage, lighting, all of it more complicated below the surface. Unless the location served a greater purpose: isolation, protection, containment. Perhaps the labyrinth wasn't meant to be seen by the public. Perhaps it wasn't meant to be entered at all, except by those with very specific knowledge. There's even speculation that the labyrinth intersects with the Book of the Hidden Chambers, a real funerary text known as the Amduat, which describes the underworld as a series of interconnected rooms and guarded gates. Could the labyrinth have been a literal map of the afterlife? A place where rituals mirrored the journey of the soul through darkness and rebirth? We can't say for certain, because we haven't been down there. Because the labyrinth, if it still exists, remains untouched. And perhaps that's what makes it so important. In an age when ancient mysteries are often reduced to museum displays or scan data, Hawara offers something rare, a legend that has not yet been resolved. It sits just out of reach, not lost, not erased, but simply waiting for the right tool, waiting for the right moment, waiting for someone to ask the right question. Until then, the earth holds its silence, and the labyrinth sleeps beneath. The waters of time. In the desert at Dashur stands a monument that seems uncertain. At first glance, the bent pyramid of Sneferu looks like a mistake. Rising up from the desert floor, its lower half ascends at a steep 54-degree angle. Then suddenly, about halfway up, the slope shifts dramatically to just 43 degrees. The result is a jarring visual break, a pyramid that changes its mind mid-construction. No other pyramid in Egypt has this feature, and to this day, no one can fully explain why it was built this way or how it still stands. Commissioned by Pharaoh Sneferu, founder of the 4th dynasty and father of Khufu, the builder of the Great Pyramid, the bent pyramid is one of the oldest true pyramids in Egypt, constructed around 2600 BCE. It predates the more famous pyramids at Giza. And unlike most others from its era, it's incredibly well preserved. Much of its original casing, stones remain intact, offering a rare look at how pyramids once gleamed under the desert sun. But the mystery isn't in its survival, it's in its shape. Why would ancient engineers, masters of precision and symmetry, build a monument with a fundamental structural change halfway through? Was it a miscalculation, a sudden architectural crisis, a symbolic design, or something far more intentional and less understood? Mainstream theories propose a construction error, that early in the pyramid's build, architects realized the steep 54-degree angle was too aggressive. It may have caused instability or even partial collapse of the internal structure. To save the project and the pharaoh's investment, they supposedly changed the angle midway, lessening the pressure on the core. That theory is simple, logical, convenient, but it comes with problems. First, the bent pyramid never collapsed. Despite being over 4,500 years old and bearing signs of early experimentation in pyramid design, it remains one of the most stable ancient structures in Egypt. There are cracks and settling, yes, but nothing catastrophic. The transition in angle was done cleanly and intentionally, with no sign of a hasty fix. The pyramid's structure, including its 2 internal chambers and offset entrances, suggests careful pre-planning, not desperate correction. Second, the placement of the change. In slope is too elegant. It isn't abrupt or awkward. The builders created a smooth, geometric shift. They didn't just fix a problem. They redesigned a monument in the middle of construction and executed it flawlessly. That's not panic. That's deliberate redesign, or design from the start. And third, there's a second entrance on the pyramid's north face, completely separate from the main descending passage. It leads to another internal chamber, offset from the central axis. 2 entrances, 2 chambers, 2 slopes. Some Egyptologists believe these features may point to 2 construction phases, or even 2 symbolic meanings encoded in a single structure. So, what was the purpose? One line of thought is cosmological. In ancient Egyptian belief, pyramids were not just tombs. They were machines for resurrection, aligning the pharaoh with the heavens and the sun god Ra. The steep angle might have symbolized the steep climb to the afterlife, while the change in slope marked a spiritual transition or transformation. The 2 chambers could represent the earthly self and the eternal Ka, a dual-path model for spiritual ascension. Another theory is political. Sneferu was consolidating power in a newly unified Egypt. The bent pyramid may have served as a public demonstration of architectural innovation and divine authority. A shift in design wouldn't have been seen as failure, but as mastery over change, an ability to adapt, to control the chaos. And then there are the unspoken possibilities. Some researchers suggest the bent pyramid is a repository of encoded knowledge, a physical puzzle meant to embody principles of sacred geometry, celestial mechanics, or lost technology. Its unique form may preserve data through shape rather than script. Others have noted its unusual internal acoustics, sharp temperature differentials between chambers, and unexplained symbolic echoes in later religious architecture. Whatever the reason, the pyramid's form defies the clean, confident lines of later projects like the Red Pyramid or Khufu's Great Pyramid at Giza. It is the product of ambition colliding with unknown complexity, a vision adjusting to forces we no longer fully understand, and yet it endures, a half-miracle in stone, a monument to a decision no one remembers, a message from a time when failure and genius wore the same face. From the outside, the bent pyramid is strange, but inside, it's even more baffling. Unlike most pyramids of its time, which typically have a single burial chamber beneath or within the base, the bent pyramid contains two separate internal chambers, each accessed from a different entrance, and neither aligned with the pyramid's center. That alone is strange, but it gets weirder. The first entrance, located on the north face, leads to a long descending passageway that drops deep into the pyramid before rising again into the lower chamber. A high-ceilinged room with a steep, corbelled roof built to distribute weight. From there, another corridor leads upward to a sealed stone portcullis, a massive sliding block designed to prevent entry or perhaps seal something in. The second entrance, located higher up on the west face, leads into a completely separate chamber, also corbelled and equally complex in its construction. The two chambers appear unconnected, and yet both are part of the same pyramid. No other pyramid has this configuration. The design is unusual. It's asymmetrical, which is extremely rare in Egyptian royal architecture. To put it plainly, this pyramid breaks the rules. So what were Sneferu's builders doing? Some scholars suggest these chambers represent an evolution of design, that architects were experimenting with spatial orientation and burial chamber positioning. But again, the execution is too clean. The pyramid doesn't feel experimental. It feels precise. The chambers were carved with intention, the sloped passages, the angles, the sealed doors, all of it reflects planning, not improvisation. Let's talk engineering. This pyramid was built from millions of limestone blocks, some weighing over 15 tons. The casing stones, many still intact, were polished smooth and placed with such precision that even today you can slide your hand across them without feeling the joints. The core masonry is dense and layered to resist pressure from above and shifting sand from below. The base is over 600 feet wide, yet the builders managed to maintain structural integrity. Despite changing the angle midway through the build, an engineering nightmare by modern standards, one theory suggests the angle change reduced weight on the upper levels, preventing the pyramid from collapsing under its own mass. But here's the thing. Even that explanation doesn't fully hold. Later pyramids built at shallower angles still suffered internal collapses. The bent pyramid, still standing. That suggests not a lucky correction, but mastery over balance and load, even under unusual conditions. Then there are the sealed blocks. Several areas inside the bent pyramid are inaccessible, blocked by massive stone slabs or collapsed corridors. Some of these features appear deliberate, designed not just to protect the internal structure, but to permanently conceal parts of it. Why? No known tomb has ever been found inside. No sarcophagus, no funerary texts, no wall inscriptions or decorative reliefs, just stone and silence. This has led some researchers to question whether the bent pyramid was ever used as a tomb. If it wasn't, then what was it? A symbolic structure, a celestial simulator, a sealed archive. We also have to consider the surrounding structures. The bent pyramid sits in an enclosure that includes a satellite pyramid, possibly for the pharaohs, Kai or spiritual double, and a mortuary temple now in ruins. But here too, things are off. The layout deviates from standard pyramid temple causeway design. Some features appear unfinished. Others seem misplaced. It's as if the whole site was operating under a different set of rules, as though it was built to reflect something not entirely architectural, something conceptual. And then there's the acoustics. Inside the bent pyramid, sound behaves strangely. Several researchers have noted unusual echo patterns, resonances that vary depending on where you stand. The corbelled ceilings, the angles, and the chamber materials create standing waves, zones where sound is amplified or distorted. Was this intentional? The Egyptians were known for using acoustics in temples, chanting in hypostyle halls where the echo magnified priestly voices. Could the pyramid itself have been part of a sensory ritual, a chamber for sacred sound, a machine not of death, but of transformation? We don't know, because just like other mysteries in Egypt, the bent pyramid was never explained by its creators. They left us no guide, no key, just math, just stone, just an object that seems to obey rules we haven't fully rediscovered. What's most extraordinary is that this monument, bizarre as it is, was Sneferu's first pyramid. After building it, he didn't stop. Just a few miles away, he ordered construction of the Red Pyramid, a near-perfect conventional pyramid built at a consistent 43-degree angle. Some believe it was his correction, the solution to the problem of the bent pyramid. But what if it wasn't a correction at all? What if Sneferu had already succeeded? What if the bent pyramid wasn't a failure to be fixed, but a message, an engineered enigma, a deliberate break from linear design? If the bent pyramid was more than just a structural experiment, if its symmetry, angles, and dual chambers weren't a mistake, but a message, then what exactly was it trying to say? To decode that, we have to step away from the blueprint and look up, because for ancient Egyptians, pyramids weren't just built to rise into the sky. They were aligned with it. The sun, stars, and constellations weren't just celestial objects. They were gods, timekeepers, judges, gateways to the afterlife. The bent pyramid is no exception. It's aligned almost perfectly to true north, a feat that would require advanced astronomical observation and geometric calculation. Its base is square, its sides symmetrical, until, of course, that famous shift in angle. But that change may have carried cosmic meaning. Several researchers have proposed that the bent pyramid's design mirrors not just a technical adjustment, but a symbolic transition. The lower half, rising sharply, may represent the difficult ascent of the soul, the harsh, steep climb from earthly life towards spiritual elevation. The upper half, with its shallower angle, might represent the soul's entry into divine alignment, calmer, more balanced, and more stable. A kind of metaphysical slope correction. Others go further. They argue that the two slopes form a visual representation of duality, a concept core to Egyptian thought: life and death, light and dark, earth and sky. In this reading, the bent pyramid becomes a cosmic diagram, not just a burial site, a monument to transformation, not of body but of being. Now consider the broader context. The bent pyramid isn't isolated. It sits within a triangular formation of Sneferu's pyramid projects: the Meidum Pyramid, his earlier attempt, the Bent Pyramid, and the Red Pyramid, which came after. Some researchers believe these three structures form a geometric progression, not just chronologically but symbolically, a physical metaphor for evolving consciousness, or an architectural rite of passage spanning decades. More intriguingly, when plotted against other major monuments like Giza, Heliopolis, and sacred necropolises in Saqqara, astronomers and geographers have found angular alignments that suggest deliberate planning at a scale we're only beginning to understand. Lines connecting Sneferu's pyramids align with the heliacal rising of Sirius, the most sacred star in ancient Egypt, the one associated with Isis and the rebirth of the Nile. So what if the bent pyramid was more than a building? What if it was a map? Not a map of land, but a map of transformation. A three-dimensional, stone-coded ritual that mirrored the sun's path, the soul's journey, or a forgotten spiritual cosmology. That might explain why the pyramid includes two chambers, two entrances, and two distinct architectural halves. Not because builders made a mistake, but because the monument had two purposes, one visible, one concealed, one for the body and one for the divine. Let's not forget, the bent pyramid is one of the few pyramids that still has much of its casing intact. Most pyramids were stripped of their smooth limestone exteriors centuries ago, but here the outer surface remains, offering an unfiltered glimpse of the original vision. It reflects light in a way that alters its visual form at different times of day, almost as if the pyramid is meant to change shape, to shift perception as the sun moves across the sky. And yet, despite all this, despite its preservation, its unique geometry, and its unprecedented complexity, the bent pyramid is often understudied and undervisited. It stands in the shadow of its more famous cousins at Giza. Tour guides rush past it, textbooks simplify it as a failed experiment, but it refuses to go away. Each year, engineers, physicists, and alternative historians return to Dashur, remeasuring its angles, scanning its corridors, analyzing its materials, hoping for the missing piece. And each year, the pyramid stays silent, imposing, unchanged, its true purpose, still sealed in stone. And maybe that's the point. The bent pyramid is not just a riddle, it's a statement, a refusal to fit into linear history, a reminder that not every monument can be reduced to function. Some were built not to entomb, but to transmit, not to explain, but to challenge. Some are built to outlast understanding, and in that, the bent pyramid might be the most honest of all, because it doesn't pretend to give us answers. It simply asks better questions. In the granite quarries of Aswan, half buried in the bedrock, lies a monument that never rose, but still towers over nearly everything we know about ancient Egyptian stonework. It's called the Unfinished Obelisk, and if it had been completed, it would have been the largest single piece of stone the ancient Egyptians ever attempted to carve, move, and raise. Over 137 feet long, weighing an estimated 1,200 tons, it dwarfs any obelisk ever successfully erected. But it remains there, lying on its side, still attached to the bedrock, still holding secrets. To walk beside it today is to face the sheer scale of Egypt's ambition. It stretches longer than a modern 747 jet. Its mass equals nearly 3 fully loaded passenger planes, yet it was carved using dolerite pounding stones with no steel, no cranes, and no motors. Just manpower, vision, and something that went wrong. Because halfway through its creation, a flaw appeared, a long vertical crack along the body of the stone. Egyptologists believe this crack rendered the obelisk structurally unstable, causing the builders to abandon it mid-carving. To modern engineers, that's a plausible explanation. Obelisks had to stand tall and withstand immense pressure. Any crack, even small, could compromise the integrity of the monument, especially when being transported or raised. And yet, the abandonment itself raises more questions than answers. Why continue working a monolith of that size so late into the carving process, only to find a crack near completion? Wouldn't an experienced quarry team have scouted the stone thoroughly before committing months, possibly years of labor? More importantly, how exactly did they intend to move it? Because the unfinished obelisk is not just big, it's impossibly big. It weighs nearly double the largest obelisk ever successfully transported, the Lateran obelisk, now in Rome, which stands at 105 feet and weighs around 455 tons. That stone took hundreds of workers, dozens of oxen, and specially designed sledges, rollers, and ships just to get it out of Egypt. And that was in the Roman era, with better equipment. The unfinished obelisk is nearly 3 times that weight. So, was it an overreach? A symbolic display of power? A pharaoh's impossible order? Some believe it was commissioned by Queen Hatshepsut, one of Egypt's few female pharaohs and a master of monumental architecture. During her reign, obelisks were more than just decorative. They were spiritual antennae, sacred beacons pointing to the gods. Erecting one of this size could have signaled dominance, divinity, and permanence. The message? Only a god can raise this, and I will. But what if the crack was not the end of the story, but the beginning? There's evidence that work continued on the obelisk even after the crack appeared. Tool marks deepen in areas where the floor was already visible. Did they hope to cut around the damage? Patch it? Or did they abandon it in stages, unsure if the project could be salvaged? Or was the crack just an excuse? Because among fringe theorists and some independent engineers, another theory lingers. The obelisk was never meant to be moved. They argue that its purpose wasn't architectural, but ritualistic. That the act of carving it, on that scale, in that spot, was the point. A performance of divine labor, a monument to possibility, not completion. Others suggest the crack itself may have symbolic meaning, a cosmic imperfection etched into a structure meant to channel energy or mark a celestial event. It sounds wild until you realize how little we actually understand about how obelisks were raised at all. Despite surviving examples all over the world, from Karnak to Paris to New York, no ancient Egyptian text has ever explained the method for erecting them. No drawings, no blueprints, just finished results. So here we are, staring at a monument that was too big to raise, too big to transport, and possibly too big to understand. And it's not buried in sand or damaged by time. It's right there, in the open, in perfect view. Reminder that sometimes the greatest Egyptian mystery isn't what they built, but what they left unfinished. To understand the unfinished obelisk is to confront one basic, stubborn question. How? How did ancient Egyptians, using tools made of stone, copper, and grit, begin shaping a single or 200-ton granite monolith with such clean precision? Walk alongside the trench that frames the obelisk, and you'll see unmistakable signs of human labor, rows of pounding marks, scoured channels, and smooth, shallow cuts. The tools responsible? Most likely dolerite hammerstones, round, hard stones used to bash at the granite until a depression formed. Over time, days, weeks, maybe months, those depressions became lines, and those lines became separation trenches. Simple, but effective. Experimental archaeologists have tried to replicate the technique. Using authentic materials and techniques, they've managed to recreate the basic process, but at a fraction of the scale. What takes modern volunteers hours to dig out a few inches, ancient workers somehow repeated over hundreds of feet with uncanny consistency. That suggests more than just manpower. It implies organization, understanding, and relentless quality control. Then there's the matter of tolerances. Even incomplete, the obelisk's flat planes, consistent dimensions, and parallel alignment hint at a surveying system far more advanced than commonly assumed. Some researchers suggest the Egyptians may have used primitive levels, plumb lines, and copper chisels for fine-tuning. But others question whether those tools alone could produce such large-scale geometric accuracy. The problem isn't just scale, it's material. Granite is unforgiving. It chips unpredictably. It resists abrasion. Yet the quarrymen at Aswan had mastered it to a degree that modern stoneworkers still respect. In the 1990s, engineers tried to simulate how such a massive object could be lifted, rotated, and transported. Most methods, sleds, rollers, cranes, failed under the stress of weight and friction. Even with machinery, moving a 200-ton block is a logistical nightmare. Which leads back to the question, did they ever intend to move it at all? Was this really a failed monument? Or a masterclass in what was possible? And perhaps that's the true legacy of the unfinished obelisk. Not in what it would have been, but in what it says even now, that the Egyptians weren't guessing, they weren't primitive. They were deliberate, calculating on a scale we still can't replicate without steel, software, and fuel. A forgotten team, using primitive tools and advanced planning, carved a message into stone, not in words, but in sheer, impossible ambition, and then they left it. So what does it mean when a civilization known for perfection leaves something unfinished? In a culture where tombs were sealed with mathematical precision, where temples aligned with stars and equinoxes, where even the smallest statues were inscribed with meaning, why would the most massive obelisk ever carved be left abandoned, half released from the earth? The traditional answer is simple: it cracked. The stone, under stress, split near the base during extraction. For a monument meant to last eternity, that flaw rendered it unusable. So the project was halted. Logical, practical, but that answer only addresses the surface, because the truth is, we don't really know when the crack happened, or how, or even why it mattered. Egyptian monuments are filled with imperfections that were either hidden or tolerated. In some cases, cracks were worked around. In others, they were integrated into the design. And in many tombs, far more flawed. And than this obelisk, ritual function took precedence over physical perfection. So the question becomes, was the crack the real reason or the excuse? And what if the act of leaving it unfinished was the meaning all along? Here's where the theories deepen. Some Egyptologists have proposed that the unfinished obelisk might have been a training ground, a site where workers honed their skills under the supervision of royal architects. In that view, the obelisk was a test, not meant for transport, but meant to push boundaries. A prototype, a how far can we go? Experiment in stone. Others take a more symbolic view. They suggest the obelisk may have been deliberately abandoned as part of a ritual, a votive offering on a massive scale. In Egyptian theology, incompleteness was not always failure. It could represent potential, transition, a gesture toward the gods, left open for divine completion. In that framework, the obelisk becomes a sacred pause, a frozen echo of intention, not a broken plan. Then, there are deeper echoes. To many modern observers, the unfinished obelisk is more than an artifact. It's a reminder of limits. In a culture obsessed with controlling time, mastering the afterlife, and building monuments to last forever, this massive, raw, flawed stone serves as a counterpoint. It says, some things resist finishing. Some ambitions remain too large to fulfill. Some monuments, no matter how well planned, don't want to be completed, and in that way, it becomes strangely human. It carries weight not just in mass, but in metaphor. This wasn't a statue shattered in war or a temple ruined by erosion. It was a project stopped, not destroyed. The absence is intact, the silence is deliberate, and perhaps that's what fascinates us. Because unlike the polished obelisks that now stand in Rome or Paris or Istanbul, cut off from their original context and repurposed as trophies, this one is still Egyptian, still embedded in its origin, still connected to the quarry, the landscape, the workers who struck it. It hasn't been moved, it hasn't been claimed. It just is a question in stone, a statement too heavy to finish. A line half written by a civilization that otherwise always completed the sentence. And what if that's why it still matters today? In an age of instant solutions, digital perfection, and shallow completion, the unfinished obelisk reminds us of something older, something harder. That effort alone is monumental, that trying itself leaves a mark, that not everything needs to be completed to carry power. because maybe it was never broken, maybe it's perfect, because it stopped where it did. For centuries, Heracleion was just a name in dusty texts, a rumor, a half-remembered city whispered through the writings of Herodotus and a few scattered Greek chronicles, a port said to rival Alexandria, yet mysteriously absent from every map. Most scholars believed it was simply a myth, a mistaken reference to another city, or perhaps an exaggerated name for a lost district of Thonis, an Egyptian city near the Canopic branch of the Nile, until it wasn't. In the year 2000, French underwater archaeologist Frank Goddio and his team were surveying the seabed off the coast of Abu Qir Bay, near modern-day Alexandria. Their goal, locate Napoleonic warships lost centuries earlier. What they found instead stunned the archaeological world. Statues, columns, hieroglyphs, temples, coins, ceremonial boats, all perfectly preserved beneath layers of silt, mud, and saltwater. Heracleion, lost for over 1,000 years, had been real all along, and it was lying just under the surface. The discovery was more than monumental. It was civilizational. Over the next few years, Goddio's team would uncover an entire cityscape, massive 5-meter-tall statues of Egyptian gods like Hapi, intricately carved steles written in both Greek and Egyptian, gold coins bearing the name of pharaohs, and stone temple foundations that matched ancient accounts of Heracleion's layout. The site had everything: temples to Amun-Gereb and Khonsu, a complex of ceremonial harbors, storage jars, bronze weights, and even jewelry, left exactly as it had fallen when the city sank, and yet no one had known it was there. That's because Heracleion hadn't simply been lost in time. It had been swallowed by the sea itself. How did that happen? Historians and geologists offer a mix of explanations. Some believe that a series of earthquakes and soil liquefaction events destabilized the Nile Delta in late antiquity. Essentially, the ground beneath Heracleion turned to sludge. Combined with rising sea levels, this made the city's foundations buckle, collapsing buildings into the water over time. Others point to the city's geography. Heracleion was built on the delta's wettest, most unstable edge, a patchwork of islands and canals, raised only slightly above sea level and vulnerable to both flooding and erosion. Over centuries, sediment clogged its waterways, and water overtook the land. The city was eventually abandoned, then forgotten, its name merging with myth, while Alexandria rose just a few kilometers away. And still others believe something more symbolic was at play. Heracleion, named after Heracles, Hercules, and once home to religious festivals involving pharaohs and divine processions, may have served a ceremonial function that diminished after Egypt's conquest by foreign empires. When the rituals stopped, the city lost its meaning. Then nature erased the rest. But make no mistake, this wasn't a minor outpost. Ancient texts suggest that Heracleion was the main customs port of Egypt before Alexandria was founded. Every ship that entered the Nile from the Mediterranean had to pass through it. It was a gateway, a place of first contact, trade, diplomacy, and ritual, which makes its disappearance all the more haunting. A city so important, gone, not looted, not burned, not buried, drowned, and what's more, we've only uncovered a fraction. As of today, less than 5% of Heracleion has been excavated. Let that sink in, literally. Despite over 2 decades of research, the vast majority of this once great city remains locked beneath the seabed, preserved in silt and salt water off Egypt's northern coast. Not because we've given up, but because underwater archaeology moves slowly, painstakingly, and Heracleion is no ordinary sight. The city sprawls across an area of nearly 11 square kilometers, a massive submerged metropolis hidden under layers of sand, mud, and marine sediment. It's not just one structure or temple, it's a complete civic layout. Avenues, canals, quays, stone docks, warehouses, religious complexes, and private homes. And the deeper researchers go, the more complex it becomes. Using multi-beam sonar, magnetometers, and sub-bottom profilers, Frank Godio's team has mapped entire stretches of Heraclean's ghostly geometry. They've located underwater pathways lined with stone blocks, sunken sanctuaries, once dedicated to Amun-Gereb and Isis, still carry the faint outlines of their walls. And everywhere, scattered across the seabed, are the remnants of life: oil lamps, wooden coffins, metal tools, inscribed stelae, and coins from the Ptolemaic and late periods. Incredibly, many of these artifacts are almost perfectly preserved. The combination of low oxygen silt and calm bay waters has acted like a natural time capsule, protecting delicate wooden structures and inscriptions that would have long decayed on land. Even ceremonial boats used in ancient river rituals have been found resting upright in the sediment as if still waiting to be launched. One of the most fascinating finds. A massive stele inscribed in both Egyptian hieroglyphs and Greek, detailing decrees from Pharaoh Nectanebo the Faun in the 4th century BCE. This stele not only proves Heraclean's name and location, it confirms its dual religious and commercial importance during one of Egypt's most politically fragile periods. Yet every answer uncovers more questions. Many buildings remain inaccessible, buried too deep or too fragile to excavate without risk of collapse. Others are visible, but require extensive documentation and conservation before any artifact can be removed. In some areas, layers of sediment are meters thick, hiding entire neighborhoods beneath a blanket of river runoff and shifting tides. And then there's the growing concern: Heraclean may not be alone. Satellite and sonar data suggest that other submerged structures, possibly even other cities, may lie nearby. Thonis, mentioned in conjunction with Herakleion in both Egyptian and Greek texts, could be part of the same complex or a distinct settlement entirely. It's possible we're looking not at a single sunken city, but at an entire drowned civilization, lost beneath the delta's waters. And still, the excavation team is racing against time. As climate change accelerates sea level rise and coastal erosion, the site becomes more difficult to access each year. Saltwater intrusion threatens delicate materials, shifting currents recover exposed areas, and the clock ticks on a site that has already waited centuries to be found. But here's what's most staggering. Everything uncovered so far, from colossal statues to golden coins, was recovered from just a handful of trenches, which means that beneath the remaining 95%, the greatest discoveries may still be waiting. A lost library, a buried palace, entire docks filled with sunken ships? We don't know, because the sea keeps its secrets well. There's something different about cities that disappear beneath the sea. They don't decay like ruins left in the open air. They don't crumble into dust or burn or fade into desert winds. They sink, slowly, silently, swallowed whole by a shifting earth and a rising tide. And that's what happened to Heracleion. This wasn't just a port. It was once Egypt's gateway to the Mediterranean, a vital link in trade, religion, and diplomacy. It hosted pharaohs during ceremonial processions. Its priests welcomed Greek envoys and merchants. Its temples rivaled those in Thebes, and then, over the course of centuries, it was erased. Not by war, not by conquest, by nature, and perhaps by time itself. So what does Herakleion really tell us? First, that civilizations are never as permanent as they seem. We imagine ancient Egypt as eternal, carved in stone, untouchable. But Heracleion was built on water, on delta silt, on shifting, fragile ground. It was a city made powerful not because it defied nature, but because it coexisted with it, until nature changed the rules. The city began to sink, not all at once, but over generations. Temples tilted, canals clogged, columns sank beneath their own weight. Eventually, the land gave way entirely, perhaps due to a combination of liquefaction, subsidence, earthquakes, and rising sea levels. The city that once stood between gods and trade routes slipped below the waterline and into memory, and for more than 1,000 years, that's where it stayed. Second, Heracleion reminds us that myth often contains memory. For decades, historians dismissed it as legend, a mistaken double name for another city, a fabrication, but Herodotus had written about it, so had Diodorus. Their texts described a city where Heracles himself was honored, where Helen of Troy and Paris once took refuge, and where priests conducted rituals of divine legitimacy for Egypt's rulers. All of it was dismissed, until it was pulled from the sea, piece by piece, just as the ancients had described. We often treat mythology as poetry, but Heracleion proves something deeper. Sometimes the story is real. The names, the gods, the ceremonies, they weren't just allegory, they were addresses, coordinates, and we ignored them because they sounded too impossible to be true. Until they weren't, and finally, Heracleion speaks to what's still ahead. Most of the city remains untouched. Its mysteries are still sealed beneath sediment and silt. The full map hasn't been drawn. The story hasn't been fully told. That leaves an open question that hangs over every diver, every sonar scan, every artifact retrieved. What else lies beneath our assumptions? If Heracleion can vanish for fun 200 years, what other chapters of human history have we lost to water, sand, jungle, ice? What other names do we think are myth simply because we haven't found them yet? In the end, Heracleion didn't vanish. We did. We drifted away. From the shoreline, from the gods, from the rituals that once gave meaning to a city that stood between sea and civilization. And now, as we dive back down, piece by piece, we are not just recovering Heracleion. We are remembering what it means to be impermanent, to rise, to fall, and to wait beneath the waves until someone looks again. Beneath the Mediterranean, where sunlight flickers across silted ruins and silence has reigned for centuries, Heracleion still stands. A city once thought to be legend, now revealed. A port of gods, pharaohs and priests, submerged but not erased, preserved, not buried. Its temples are broken, yes, its stone faces are dulled by time. But the story, it's not finished. Because 95% of Heracleion still hasn't been touched, still sleeps beneath the water, still holds names, records, and truths the surface has forgotten. And this is just one city. How many more Heracleions lie hidden beneath coastlines, drowned riverbeds, inland seas? How many myths are actually waiting to be proven true? We thought we knew the edges of ancient Egypt, but we were looking too high when the real story was written below sea level. If this journey beneath the surface stirred something in you, don't let it end here. Subscribe for more deep dives into lost worlds, ancient enigmas, and the stories that time tried to erase. Drop a comment below. Do you think Heracleion was just the beginning? What else might lie hidden beneath the sea? And hit the bell icon, because in the next episode we're going somewhere even deeper, where ruins aren't just forgotten. They were never meant to be found until now.